Hello everyone, Mehdi Riazi again. In this short video, I'm going to discuss and explain one of the very common quantitative methods, which is called questionnaire survey, and the type of statistical analysis that is usually used to analyze the data collected through survey studies, which is correlation. So my goal in this short video is to present some of the topics usually addressed by survey research and also the process of conducting survey studies and the statistical analysis that are used to analyze the data collected through survey research. And finally, I give you two samples of a survey and correlational study that you can refer to and see how researchers have defined their study and have done the analysis. Basically, in questionnaire survey, researchers would like to collect data from a group of interest, and this group of interest could be students, teachers, even researchers, customers, or any other group of interest. And usually, researchers would like to collect data about this group's beliefs, attitudes, actions, preferences on a particular topic. Investigating relationship between different variables, for example, gender, level of education, participants' motivation, attitudes, beliefs, preferences is therefore one of the main goals in conducting survey studies. Sometimes it's also possible to compare views, attitudes, or motivations of two or three groups of interest. So, what do survey studies usually measure? They measure three types of variables. The first one is usually called factual information, and this is the demographic information that researchers would like to collect from participants as one type of variable. The other section in questionnaire surveys usually include attitudinal information, which includes items or questions about respondents' opinions, beliefs, interests on certain topics. And there could be other sections, for example, like a behavioral section in that researchers elicit information about respondents' habits, styles, actions, and strategies, for example. Depending on the purpose of the survey study, researchers might include further sections in their questionnaire. Some of the topics usually addressed by survey research include participants' motivation, beliefs, and attitudes, their learning experiences or working style preferences, use of strategies in their studies, in their work, in communicating with other people, participants' level of anxiety when they are engaged in performing a task, for example, or in dealing with language in different situations, and needs assessment. Sometimes survey research is used in order to gather information about a particular group's needs for different, educational purposes. How researchers go about and collect their data from participants? There are different ways that those who do questionnaire survey can collect data from participants. These include face-to-face administration of questionnaire if you have access to participants and if it's possible to bring them together in one place at one time, then it would be very efficient to distribute the questionnaire among the participants and collect the required data. If that's not a possibility, then it is possible to mail the questionnaire to the participants and ask them to complete the questionnaire and return it to you. Remember that if you are going to mail questionnaire to participants, you need actually to include a self-stamped envelope so that participants can put it in their completed surveys and return it to you as the researcher. Given the new information and technology, information and communication, and social media facilities, it's also possible to use social media and emails and web-based surveys and two online tools that usually researchers use in order to collect data from participants are SurveyMonkey and Qualtrics. You might want to search them from Google and see how it's possible to design your questionnaire and administer it online. At some points also it's possible to use telephone survey through gathering data from participants through telephoning them. The process of conducting a survey study is that after you choose a topic of interest, then usually you pose a general question that you would like to investigate through the questionnaire. And then once you have a general question, then it's time to investigate the literature and do a secondary research, as we discussed it before, to find out what other researchers have done about this topic and question. And then after you review the relevant literature, it's possible for you to narrow down your research question in light of the literature that you have reviewed, and then you define your population and choose your sample, and then you formulate your specific research questions. In other words, you identify the variables that you are going to collect data about those variables in your research questions. You can select or create appropriate instruments, questionnaires. Sometimes questionnaires are already available, and therefore you can borrow from other researchers. But remember to credit appropriately about the source of questionnaire that you are borrowing from other researchers. But in some occasions and situations, you might have to create your own questionnaire to fit the type of questions that you are going to investigate. Once you have defined your population and you have selected a representative sample and you have your instrument ready, then it's possible to collect and analyze the data. You can administer the questionnaire, collect data, and then do the data analysis. And once you have the results, then it's time for you to prepare your report and write the results of the survey research. So the first is, one of the first steps actually in the questionnaire survey study is to define your target population. Because ultimately in quantitative research, we are interested to generalize our findings from the sample to the target population. And once you define the target population, then it's possible to think about a representative sample. There are different sampling procedures for quantitative research, including simple random sampling, or a stratified random sampling, or cluster sampling procedure that you can use in order to select a sample. Of course, in some situations where these more robust type of sampling procedures are not possible, researchers might choose a convenient sample from the target population. And then you collect data from this small sample, and when you analyze the data from the sample, usually this type of analysis, statistical analysis, is referred to as descriptive statistics because it describes the characteristic of the sample. But then based on the results gained through descriptive statistics, it's possible actually to perform inferential statistical analysis and making generalizations about the target population using the sample characteristics. The statistical procedures, therefore, are descriptive statistics and inferential statistics in quantitative research more broadly, but in questionnaire survey in particular. So through descriptive statistics, researchers describe the sample characteristics in terms of the average performance and variation among the participants. And usually each sample characteristic is called a statistic. So mean, for example, or standard deviation, each of them is a statistic. And because we gather different sample characteristics, therefore the term statistics actually come in. And descriptive statistics means those statistics that describe the sample. When we want to do inferential statistics, we would like to make generalizations about the target population, and usually this is done using the results and of the analysis we have done on the sample. So through inferential statistics, it's possible to make generalizations about the target population. Let's have a look at what these two types of statistics include. Descriptive statistics usually includes measures of central tendency and measures of dispersion. Measures of central tendency are mode, median, and mean, and measures of dispersion include range, variance, and standard deviation. However, in most of the quantitative studies, it is the mean and the standard deviation which is the main, point of consideration for further analysis in inferential statistics. Some of the type of inferential statistics that researchers use in order to analyze survey results and making generalizations about the target population include relationship between variables. If you remember, for example, we talked about demographic variables and perceptual variables as well as behavior variables. So it's possible to run correlation between these different types of variables. Sometimes if we want, we can use chi-square as a non-parametric statistical test of significance when we would like to do some frequency and percentages analysis and making generalizations about the target population. If we are going to compare two or more groups, then we can use t-test for two groups and ANOVA analysis of variance for making comparison of more than two groups. One of the actually strong strengths of survey study is that it's possible to build models, and this building model could be done through regression analysis, and more sophisticated statistical procedure is called structural equation modeling. And therefore, when researchers build models, then it's possible to make predictions about the target population. Since correlation is one of the core statistical analysis in survey studies, therefore it is worth to know about how to understand and interpret correlation coefficient. And correlation coefficient is represented by lowercase r, and you can see it in different research reports. And this coefficient has a range of -1 to +1. In other words, correlation coefficient can take any value or magnitude between -1 and +1. How do we interpret correlation coefficient? There are three indices or factors that we use in order to analyze correlation coefficient. The first one is the magnitude of the correlation. The closer the value of the correlation coefficient to 1, the stronger the relationship actually would be. And if you get a correlation of 1, then it means perfect correlation. The other index that we use in order to interpret correlation coefficient is the sign of correlation. There are correlation coefficients are presented with either positive sign or negative sign. When it has a positive sign, usually the plus sign is not presented, and therefore we can understand that there is a positive relationship between the variables. And positive correlations show that there is a direct relationship between the variables, meaning that when one variable actually goes up, the other one goes up as well. And when variable comes down, the other variable comes down as well, or decreases as well. But when we have negative relationship between variables, it means that the relationship between the two variables is reverse, in the sense that when one variable goes up or increases, the other variable actually goes down or decreases. And the next index that we use in order to interpret correlation coefficient is the statistical significance. And this tells us whether the results that we have come across at the level of sample is by chance, or they are meaningful and therefore generalizable to the target population. A rule of thumb, and this is something that actually you might find in the research methods textbook for the interpretation of the magnitude of the correlation coefficient, is that usually correlations between 0 and 0.2 are considered as negligible or very low. Between 0.2 and 0.5 is considered as low, and between 0.4 and 0.6 moderate, and 0.6 and 0.8 substantial, and 0.8 to 1 is high to very high. As I indicated before, the higher the value or the magnitude of the correlation coefficient, the stronger the relationship between the variables will be. The sign of correlation, as again I explained before, shows direct relationship. When we have positive correlation coefficient, shows direct relationship between the two variables. And one example, for example, is that if there is a high correlation coefficient between the number of words known by participants and their reading comprehension performance, then this means that when one goes up, the other one goes up as well. When one increases their knowledge of words, they increase their comprehension performance as well. On the other hand, negative correlation, as it was explained before, shows a reverse relationship between the two variables. An example, anxiety and language learning. When language learners have a high level of anxiety, they have a low language learning achievement, and vice versa. The statistical significance in quantitative methods in general, and in survey study in particular, statistical significance is an index that tells us whether the results that we have come across are by chance or they are meaningful and therefore generalizable to the population. And usually this is the default in social sciences and humanities is 0.05. In other words, if the level of significance in a statistical analysis is equal or lower than 0.05, then we can be 95% sure that the results are meaningful and therefore generalizable to the population. On the other hand, if they are more than 0.05, then usually it is considered that these results are not dependable and they are more achieved by chance, which mostly happens through sampling error. Means that the particular sample that we have selected is not representative of the population, and therefore the results that we have achieved are due to that particular sample and not At the end of this presentation, I would like to introduce two studies that you can refer to and find out how researchers have defined their topics and how they have formulated their research questions, how they have defined their target population, and what sampling procedures they have followed in order to choose their sample, what sort of analysis they have conducted, and especially what sort of inferential statistics they have used in order to make inferences about the target population. The first study is done by Liu in 2018. It's very recent. And the title of the study is Bilingual Multilingual Learners' Willingness to Communicate in and Anxiety on Speaking Chinese and Their Associations with Self-Rated Proficiency in Chinese. This article has been published in the Journal of International Journal of Bilingual Education and Bilingualism, that you can very easily find it and read it. The other study is done by Hyon and was published in 2013. And the title of this study was Attitudes Toward Task-Based Language Learning, a study of college Korean language learners. And this study has been published in foreign languages. I hope that I have been able to give you an overview of what a survey study is and looks like, and what sort of statistical analysis is used in order to analyze the collected data. I will continue with other topics in quantitative research.